Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today. My name is Marissa Tuhalski. I am an events manager for the Office of University Events and Protocol, and I help organize MECA. So thank you so much for being here today. Just going to go over some housekeeping as a few others join. The numbers keep going up, which is a good thing. So upcoming MECA events. This month in March, I cannot believe we're already in March, starting tomorrow. We are going to have the Omni Tempe Hotel at ASU. They're going to do a Zoom presentation, going over kind of their event spaces and how to reach out to them to do either a site walkthrough or to schedule an event there. So that'll be on March 16th. March 31st, we're going to have a protocol workshop with Chris Young. It's going to be an all-day workshop at the Student Pavilion. And there is a small fee for everybody because there will be food. So that will also be coming out later this week. For today's Zoom, we are recording, and this will be sent out by the end of the week for those who are unable to make it. The slides also have a few links in them, so I will also be sending out the slides as well. Questions, we will be answering questions towards the end of the presentation, or if something comes to mind during the middle of it, please put it in the chat and we'll answer them at the end. So without further ado, let's get started. So we're going to be talking about understanding contract considerations for event planning. I'm sure all coordinators or anybody else who is here, event organizers, my apologies, have run into trying to sign contracts at some point in time. So we're just going to review what the protocol is behind it and what to look out for. And ultimately, is it something that you're supposed to be signing, or is it something that somebody else is supposed to be signing? So our agenda for today, I'm just going to introduce our speakers, and then going to jump right into the contract authority and signing authority. Facility use agreements, insurance requirements, examples, and then further instructions. Our presenters today are Brennan Carlson, who is Associate Director for Procurement Strategy, Benjamin Larson, Associate General Counsel for Office of General Counsel, Nicole Coyer, Associate General Counsel as well, and then Jackie Blessington, Associate Director of Risk Analysis and Contracts. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Brennan and Benjamin.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm going to kick us off here. So if you wouldn't mind advancing to the next slide. So just our presentation briefly is going to cover ABOR governance. ABOR is the Arizona Board of Regents. I'm going to take a look at ASU policy briefly. Then what can I sign? What should I look out for? And how to avoid agreement reviews, and what happens if a review is required. So if we can move to the next slide, I find it helpful a lot of times to understand why we do things the way we do them. And so that's what I'm going to try to cover here, and hopefully it won't be too tedious and boring, but generally speaking, ASU is one of 3 institutions in the Arizona University system, and it's governed by the Arizona Board of Regents. So ASU, NAU, and U of A are under the jurisdiction and control of ABOR. So the board itself was established under the state constitution of the state of Arizona. And each university has no separate existence apart from ABOR. They're operationally independent of one another, but they're all 3 part of the same legal entity. So if ASU gets sued, it's ABOR that's named as the relevant party. And by the same token, when we enter into contracts on behalf of the university, it's technically we enter into each contract as the Arizona Board of Regents for and on behalf of Arizona State University or University of Arizona, etc. So the purpose, the authority, the powers, and the duties of ABOR are all derived from the state constitution and the laws of the state of Arizona, which are found in the Arizona Revised Statutes. And the Board of Regents is responsible for governing the three universities in accordance with state law. And what they've done, ABOR has adopted a policy manual, which is on its website. We've provided links both to the ABOR site in general, as well as to the policy manual, which unfortunately it's not as easy to navigate the policy manual as it used to be. It used to be searchable, but at any rate, I have included the link to the manual. And the manual sets forth rules and guidelines for academic matters, business and financial matters, real estate matters, personnel matters, and the like. And so that leads us into our discussion of signature authority. So what do we mean when we refer to contract authority or signature authority? It's simply the authority to execute contracts, binding agreements on behalf of ASU. So when parties enter into an agreement, each one wants to know that the person executing the contract for the other party has the authority to bind that party. And ASU is not unique in this regard. All corporations, all legal entities have authorized signatories. So those are just individuals who have authority to enter into contracts on behalf of their institution and legally bind the institution to the contract. So referring back to the policy manual, in the case of each university, the Board of Regents has adopted policy number 3-103. And that policy simply provides, in relevant part, it kind of goes on, but in relevant part, it says university officers designated by the president of the university are authorized to execute contracts and other written instruments on behalf of the board. So what does that mean? It means that the president of each university, the president has plenary authority, full authority to execute any and every contract to which the university is a party. And the president, in turn, can delegate that signature authority to other university officers. So all signature authority at ASU, it has to be delegated in writing by President Crow. And the delegation is to the position, not to an individual person. It's to a position. So if there is no written delegation of signature authority from President Crow to a specific university position, then that position has no signature authority. And the person holding that position cannot sign agreements on behalf of the ASU. So there has to be a delegation from the president. Now, contained within Chapter 3 of the ABOR Policy Manual is the ABOR Procurement Code. That's the rules and the policies under which the university procures goods and services. And within the procurement code is policy number 3-802A6, which that permits the university's chief procurement officer to designate other procurement officers and to define the scope of their procurement authority. So there's a delegation from the CPO, Chief Procurement Officer, to the other procurement officers, indicates who they are and what authority they have to execute contracts. And so these officers have the ability to commit funds on behalf of the university for the procurement of goods and services. So if we could move to the next slide. So further to the ABOR policy, ASU has in turn adopted a contract signature authority policy. That's PUR 107. PUR just means it's in the purchasing manual. There are a number of manuals, policy manuals. I probably should have included the link to all the manuals, but for our purposes, the one that's important is the purchasing manual. And specifically policy 107, that it implements ABOR policy 3-103 and 3-802A6. And the policy simply provides that the president of the university and the CPO may delegate his or her authority to execute contracts and other written instruments to appropriate university officials in accordance with ABOR 3-103 and 3-802A6. So just to pause for a minute and say, why do we have a signature authority policy? If you think about it, I guess sometimes you might hear about people who find out that their kids went on Amazon and, ordered all this stuff without the parents' knowledge, right? Because they just have everything is already plugged in, passwords are auto-filled, unfortunately, and all of a sudden you've lost control of what you've of what you've purchased. And so, like any institution, ASU has to maintain internal controls to ensure that it is not entering into contracts, that it doesn't want to enter into, but more importantly, that it doesn't enter into contracts agreeing to things that are impermissible, either under the state constitution or state law. And Brendan's going to talk a little bit more about that. But basically, there's things that we don't want to commit the university to because there is no authority under state law to do so. Now, within PUR 107 is a link to the Office of General Counsel website. And if you go to that, and we've included the link here, but if you click on the link, you'll find the listing of all the positions to which the president has delegated signature authority. And you will find the scope of authority delegated for each position. And so the authority is limited to certain types of contracts or to certain dollar amounts, or they'll say that if it's in a form approved by general counsel, then it can be signed by the person holding that position. And so within that listing, if a job title is not listed in that policy, then the person holding that position is not authorized to sign any contract for ASU. It has to be specifically authorized by President Crow. If a job title is listed in the policy, then you have to pay careful attention to the scope of authority. What can that person sign? What can the person holding that position sign? What can't they sign? And another thing to keep in mind is that a person holding a position with signature authority cannot subdelegate the person's authority. So if I have signature authority, I can't say, you sign this for me, because for whatever reason, I can't do so. Or I can't delegate in writing that I delegate to you, subdelegate the authority that my position holds to sign XYZ. Can't do that. So if you do not have authority delegated under PUR 107, or you have not otherwise been authorized by the president in writing, there is some exceptions for an in writing delegation from President Crow. President Crow can send someone an email and say, I authorize you to sign this particular contract. And sometimes we have to do that when we have people overseas and they're signing contracts. But if you don't have something like that, something exceptional, or you're not listed, your position isn't listed, then you don't have signature authority for the university. And if you do have signature authority, I would suggest strongly that you pay careful attention to the scope of the authority so that you don't exceed it, which brings us to the last bullet point there, which is the failure to ensure that the appropriate signature authority is obtained could result in personal liability and a loss of insurance coverage for the employees involved in the transaction. So it's very important to make sure that the person signing the contract on behalf of ASU and the board has the requisite signature authority. So that brings us to the next slide.
All right, thanks, Ben. So I guess the question is going to be, so what can I actually sign? Because we got a lot of work and activities going on. The general feedback here is anything that includes general terms and conditions or general legal terms, we do not want you to sign unless you have the requisite authority to be able to do so. As far as items that you can sign, if you're confirming an order, like the details of an order, ordered 20 chairs, 30 tables, etc. Those are pretty easy things to sign off on and don't necessarily have to go through a procurement authority to be able to execute. Confirmation of receipt of goods and services. So if the table and chairs are delivered and they want you to sign off and say, yes, I received these items, there's no problem with that, as well as sales receipts and invoices. When I say there's no problem with that, that's to the extent that there's not additional legal terms that are referenced within those documents. So there are some things that you need to look out for when even if you're signing confirmations of orders or receipts or whatever else it may be. So some examples that you may want to look for are indemnification, limitation, liability, insurance requirements, governing law. We don't expect you all to know what these provisions are or know how to negotiate those items, which is why we were given the procurement authority to be able to help your team mitigate those issues. So keep on the lookout for some of those general terms. If you see them, then that would necessitate a contract review. Other items would be financial commitments beyond just a confirmation of the order. Links. Some suppliers are tricky. They'll put at the very bottom and in very small letters a link to their supplier terms that will link out to a more robust list of general terms such as indemnity, limitation, liability, etc. That we would want removed. And then other commitments beyond just simple confirmations. We want to ensure that we're not agreeing to provide additional services beyond the scope of what we agree to or anything else for that matter. Next slide. So how do I avoid an agreement review? So the easiest way to do this is to issue a purchase order to the vendor for whatever services it may be. The purchase order serves as a binding document. We can let the vendor know that because it's going to detail what we're ordering as well as include a link to our terms and conditions. As soon as a vendor starts fulfilling that order, they have essentially agreed to our terms and conditions, and no additional terms and conditions would apply. Even if they sent us a quote with their terms and conditions attached to it, if we issue a purchase order, the purchase order is what's governing the services or goods that we're receiving, and not the quote that they originally provided. It also helps expedite the purchase and payment process. You're a lot less likely to go through a bunch of roadblocks if we go through the purchasing process or purchase order process. But it's also not preferred for low dollar transactions. So if you're using it for $250 photographer or something along those lines, it probably doesn't make sense to issue a purchase order because of the number of resources that are involved in handling the approvals, entering the requisition, processing the invoicing. In that matter, we would just generally pay with the P card, and we could sign a confirmation of the order or whatever else to the extent that it doesn't include general terms and conditions. If the vendor insists that we sign their document, then we could pay with the P card, but remove the general terms and conditions. That's okay to do without having to go straight to our contracts management team to be able to review the documents. It's important that we try to go through those first two steps before we go to our procurement contracts lead, because you can imagine the volume of contracts that will be going through our team otherwise. However, if a review is required, please reach out to Marcus Benavides. He's our procurement contracts lead. He's not the sole person that will review contracts. He intakes the agreements and will delegate to the appropriate contract specialist to complete the review. Once he does that delegation, he will reach out, or the contract specialist will reach out to you to indicate that they have taken over the contract review and work with you on mitigating any outstanding issues. The last thing I want to mention is contract reviews do take some time. It could take a couple days, it could take a couple weeks, and it also depends on the flow of contracts that are currently being reviewed. So please plan accordingly. If there's an expectation to turn around within 24 hours, the chances are unlikely. Our initial feedback is gonna be, did you try issuing a purchase order? Did you try removing the terms and conditions and just signing a confirmation order to try and expedite the purchase? Otherwise, just please plan accordingly so that we can ensure that you get the services and goods that you need, as well as ensure that we have the time that we need to be able to protect the university accordingly. Thank you.
I am Nicole Collier. I'm a transactional attorney within Office of General Counsel, and one of the areas that I handle are real estate transactions, which is where facility rentals and facilities use agreements come into play. So I'm going to talk about facilities rentals, and in particular, when you might need a facilities use agreement that we refer to as an FUA. And so I'm going to sort of break it up into on-campus events versus off-campus events. For on-campus events, if you could go to the next slide, Marissa. For on-campus events, there are only certain situations in which you will need an FUA. So that the hope is that in most instances, you probably won't need an FUA, because an FUA is only needed if it's an ASU property, a third party is utilizing the space, whether that's for free or for a fee. And so if it's an internal ASU user using ASU property, you don't need an FUA. It's only when you have a third party, an outside nonprofit organization, or maybe school kids who are K through 12 school kids who are coming onto our campus and utilizing our property for an event hosted by that school. If the event was hosted by ASU, again, that's an ASU use, so that you wouldn't need an FUA in that circumstances. And so, Marissa, the next slide. So where can you find the FUA form? We actually have a form that is available for your use on the OGC website. There's a link there to that. That's the current version of the form. And this is a PDF fillable document. So it's very user-friendly for you to complete. And as long as you use the form and there aren't any changes to the form or any provisions added at the very end of the form, any miscellaneous provisions added, then it doesn't need review by anyone in OGC. It's a form that can be completed by the department, by the user. What else should you be aware of related to the FUA, though? If you do need to use it before you finalize the FUA, you should send it to financial services for review. And there is a certain reason why that's the case. And you can see those bullet points there as to why financial services needs to review. But basically, it's because there are certain buildings that ASU has financed through bonds. And for certain types of bonds, there's limitations on the amounts of use by private businesses. And so if a private business is using our property through a lease, license, a facilities use agreement, or other type of arrangement, then that's something that our financial services team has to track because we can't exceed a certain amount of use by private businesses. And so we don't expect you to know that. And so that's why we just ask that you simply send it to financial services for review before it's executed, so that they can confirm that the FUA is in compliance with our bond requirements. And who can sign the FUA? As Ben Larson has talked about, only certain administrators have the authority to sign contracts for ASU, including FUAs. There's a link there to the contracts authority generally, and it kind of sets forth who can sign certain contracts. But Marissa, if you could advance to the next slide. Specifically for FUAs, there are some individuals who have broad authority to sign FUAs without any dollar limitations. As you can imagine, that's President Crow, the executive vice presidents, the vice president for University Real Estate Development, URED, the vice president for University Business Services, UBS. And then there are some individuals who have the authority to sign FUAs under certain conditions. If the FUA is in a form approved by OGC, so that form that's on our website, that PDF fillable form, if the facilities are under the direct control of that signer, and if the FUA does not exceed a certain amount. So for example, deans can sign FUAs to allow third parties to use their facilities if that facility is under their direct control and if the amount does not exceed $20,000. There's some other examples there as well. So what do you do after the FUA is signed? Well, the department should maintain a copy in their files, and then they should send a completed copy to ASU Financial Services, again, for that compliance reason. And then finally, they should send a complete copy to ASU Real Estate Development, the URED, for their records. When it comes to off-campus rental agreements, under these circumstances, it's not necessarily an FUA that will be used because, again, an FUA is for ASU property, but for off-campus, there might be rental agreements involved. And there are certain, different contract types that might be involved. If you are renting facilities at a hotel, banquet center, conference or convention center, or other similar facilities, that should go through purchasing through the processes that Brennan just described. Other types of contracts, if they don't fit into those categories for the use of off-campus facilities, those should be reviewed by OGC. And oftentimes that particular venue, if it's not a hotel, convention center, so forth, that's going through purchasing, they might have their own form that should be reviewed by OGC. As a more recent example, there was a church actually that was hosting an event for ASU that was expecting hundreds, maybe even thousands of people for a music event, and because it was off campus, the church was actually offering the venue to ASU for free. It wasn't something that was going through purchasing, but it was there was a contract involved that OGC reviewed as a result. Some of the contract considerations in those venue rental agreements, as we've sort of alluded to already, insurance, which Jackie will talk about more in depth, liability, who is responsible in the event of any injuries to persons or damage to the property, indemnification, that is when one party is agreeing to take risk for another party. So we look at, does the contract shift responsibility to ASU inappropriately? It's one thing for ASU to take responsibility for its own actions, but if we're being asked to take responsibility for the venue's actions, that's a whole nother story. And finally, just a word of caution, even when a venue is being offered to ASU for free, there's always a potential cost, and that's the risk of injury or harm to persons or property. And so in the case of the church example that I just gave, as we were actually in the middle of negotiating that, and at first the department said, well, why do we even need an agreement? They're giving us the space for free. But we talked about how it was a music concert, who was responsible for conducting crowd control, security, things of that nature. And while we were in the middle of discussing those terms with the church, and sadly, this was around the time when the tragedy in Seoul, South Korea occurred, where a festival ended up leading to multiple deaths and injuries on what should have been a celebratory night. And so that's just something that when you wonder, why is there so much work involved related to this? It's because we want to plan and prepare and anticipate and hopefully avoid those risks. And in the unfortunate event, if there ever is any injury or harm to persons or property, that the agreement covers exactly what happens in that case. And that's all from my end. I will turn it over to Jackie.
Hi, good morning. I'm Jackie Blessington from Risk Management, and I've spoken with this group before, so some of you may have heard some of this, but we also have some updates on some of the resources that we've been able to provide for you on our website. So we'll talk a little bit about those. So we're going to talk on-campus events and off-campus events also in terms of what we require of our vendors and what we require of our facilities. And we'll talk about reviewing COIs and why that's necessary and how to do that. And then we'll also talk about the insurance coverage that can be provided by ASU if it's required. Those specifically are for off-campus events and how to go about getting a COI for that. Next slide, please.
Oh, I was just going to clarify, COI, certificate of insurance, for anybody who's wondering.
So the purpose of insurance, it's really to demonstrate that there's some financial resources to pay a claim, right? We all have our own personal insurance when it comes to our homes and our cars. And we're asking vendors to have the same thing, right? It's one tool to cover any kind of financial loss. And when we are asking others to provide us with goods or services, we are asking for them to protect us from bearing those costs that might result from a claim that comes from those services or goods. Next slide, please. So when we talk about on campus, when we're bringing suppliers to campus or to an ASU sponsored event to provide services, or whether it's rentals or face painters or whomever we're paying, we have standard insurance requirements. And those standard insurance requirements are listed on the PO. So when you issue a purchase order, they're covered there. They're also listed on the ASU risk management website, and they're also on the ASU procurement website. And that's linked to from the purchase order. So these are requirements, and while they look voluminous, and all of these links you can access when you get the slides, but while they look a little bit daunting, they're really basic insurance requirements. And although there's many coverages and many limits, they're all qualified such that really the only ones that are likely to apply to these suppliers that are helping us out with events are the general liability insurance and perhaps the auto insurance and the workman's comp. So we want vendors to be able to protect themselves, protect their employees if they have them, and then also have some financial backing, if you will, in order to protect ASU if there's any incidences or claims. And when we talk about the ASU facility use agreement that Nicole went over, that has its own insurance requirements. So when some third party is using ASU space, there are insurance requirements noted in there. Now, when we talk about off-campus events, so when we're going somewhere else to have an event, those hosting facilities, they're expected to have insurance too. We're asking them to provide a safe facility, a safe event. And so while they may have insurance requirements of us, which we'll talk a little bit about in a minute, we also expect them to have those standard requirements. And again, those are put in place via the use of a purchase order or passing them along. In the event you're using a P card, we have to pass them along in a different manner. Okay, next slide. A couple of other requirements that show up on our standards are additional assured and waiver of subrogation. And these might sound a little daunting, maybe to the smaller suppliers, but they are standards that have been put in place by our insurer, and ASU is insured by the Arizona State Department of Administration Risk Management Group, and they're also known as State Risk. And so they have provided us guidelines as to what they expect of us as their client, if you want to call it that, to pass on to those that we are working with. So additional insured provides coverage to someone other than the policyholder. And that allows the state of Arizona, DOA, ADOA, ASU, and ABOR to file a claim against another party's insurance. The waiver of subrogation allows for, it keeps them from coming back to the state and saying, hey, well, we paid the claim, but we're going to come back and sue you for it because we think you were responsible instead. So again, as someone that's insured by the state, these are state requirements that we pass along to our vendors. And I will say that our standard insurance requirements, whether the company is big or small, is really nothing that a business, any business that's set up as a company, whether it be an LLC or otherwise, they should have basic business insurance. The additional insured and waiver of subrogation is something that may cost them a few more dollars, not too much, but it's something that their insurance broker can advise on. And if there are questions about those requirements specifically, then risk management can certainly help with those as well. Okay, next slide, please. So other things that you need to think about. And when you look at the ASU risk management website, we have a site that says, or that's called insurance requirements for vendors. And those links are provided in the resources slide that's coming up. But if you're going to have an event that involves alcohol, there's certainly other requirements. And not only are there permitting requirements, but there are also additional insurance requirements, and those are outlined in the website as well. If we have an event that ASU is hosting in which ASU is expected to be in the care, custody, and control of minors, then we would have some additional insurance requirements as well of our vendors if they are participating in that event. Now, this doesn't, I'm not suggesting that any event that has minors involved has additional requirements, but when ASU is specifically the host and there aren't parents parents are not there, teachers are not there, there are not others who are watching minor children, then we need to think of some additional requirements. Now, we talked about P card purchases a little bit. Brennan mentioned that, and when we do a P card purchase, there's no contract that requires insurance. So when you have the PO, it's a contractual requirement, but with the P card, you're going to have to pass on those insurance requirements by sending the vendor to our website or passing along those requirements from our website. But you have to keep in mind that they have no contractual requirement to keep that insurance in place. So that's just something to consider whether or not you should use your P card for a purchase, depending on the scope and the risk. And then something else that we will talk about a little bit further is when ASU is asked to provide insurance, and actually the one who is providing the certificate of insurance, there are some limitations. So we'll talk about that. Okay, next slide. So the certificate of insurance, the COI, when we are setting up events and hiring suppliers and sending out our PO or our P card and our insurance requirements, they should be providing us a certificate of insurance as evidence that they do have the insurance that we ask for. And they can provide a standard accord form, which is the most typical document that provides such evidence. It doesn't mean that they can't cancel the insurance tomorrow or next week, but the contract, if we have one, the purchase order specifically, or any other written contract, does require them to maintain it if as long as there's a contract in place. But we do ask for the COI because it's really the only practical means we have to verify that the coverage exists. And so we talked a little bit about the additional insured and the waiver of subrogation requirements, and all of those things will come into play if there is a claim and we have the COI. It's a little bit easier to expedite the claim process. When you collect those certificates of insurance, you should validate them against the standards that are on the purchase order or the standards that are on the website, depending on how you're communicating those to the vendor. And there is an example that risk management has provided on our website. So you can kind of pass that on to the vendor if they need it, or if they have questions, and you can use it yourself if you're trying to figure out if they're meeting the ASU requirements. And then once you have the certificate of insurance, just keep that COI with the contract documentation. If it was a PO, keep it with your PO documents in Workday perhaps. And if it's a P card purchase, then just keep that COI on file with whatever purchase documents you have. We don't keep them all in risk management. Okay, next slide. So when ASU is required to provide insurance, so in the instance where we are going to use a facility perhaps for graduation, or we're hosting a student recruitment event, and the facility asks ASU to provide insurance, we generally like to put in some boilerplate language that explains to the third party that we are self-insured through the state of Arizona. And that's usually adequate. That language is included here. It's something that you can share with the vendor. It's also on the risk management website. If you're modifying the contract and working with procurement and the contract specialist, they have this information that they can include in the contract. But basically, instead of saying that we're going to agree to certain coverages and certain limits, this is basically just saying that we do have coverage and we are insured by the state. And if the facility requires you to submit a certificate of insurance or a COI for ASU, there are a couple of ways to do that. I think the most common way is to go onto the risk management website and request a COI. But what we would recommend, instead of getting a specific certificate of insurance for your event, we would ask that you first try to submit to them just a generic certificate of insurance. It doesn't include them as a certificate holder. It just basically says, here's the insurance that ASU has from the state of Arizona. And that master COI can be obtained from by contacting us. And very soon we will have it available on the risk management website. So it can just be downloaded by you, or you can point the vendor in that direction and they can look to see what coverage is available. If you have to have a specific COI for the certificate holder, they won't accept the generic one, then you go through the link on the risk management website to request that. Okay, next slide. When you think about the contracts that we're signing, and Nicole talked about this too, and we're looking to provide some kind of insurance for a third party, we cannot offer indemnification. We cannot list them as additional insured or offer a waiver of subrogation, even though that's what we ask for. And this is information that comes from state risk. So when you submit a certificate of insurance request that's specific for a third party, you have to include the contract. You have to attach the contract to that request. And then risk management in turn issues that request to state risk, because they are the only ones that issue certificates of insurance for ASU. If that contract that is attached has indemnification that's out of whack that ASU is on the hook for, or if it's asking for ASU to list the facility or the third party as a third party, it's going to cause some delays, and it's going to cause some negotiation on the contract terms. So it really is in the best interest of ASU, and in the interest of time, it's best to use that master generic certificate of insurance that you can get from risk management, instead of going through the process of requesting a specific one for a specific third party. Brennan touched a little bit on limitation of liability, but if we have to assign a contract from a third party and it does contain a cap where the third party's damages are going to be limited to a dollar amount, then that could affect ASU's insurance coverage, right? We can't accept a limitation of liability, take that risk on for ASU, and then expect somebody to cover us in the event of an insurance claim. So limitation of liability is something that we want to get out of a contract, and it will prompt a contract review. A contract specialist will need to be involved. And if we can't get it out of there, then we have to go as far as doing a contract risk assessment through risk management. And that requires some leadership, executive leadership approval through the business and finance team. Okay, next slide. So if you have questions about what we require of third parties, of suppliers, you can contact us. I would encourage you to look through the website. We've updated it recently and we continue to update it, but there's a lot of information there on what is required in terms of FUAs and events and general suppliers. So look there, but if you don't find what you're looking for, please reach out to us. When insurance and indemnification is required for ASU, we're happy to help with those questions as well. And if you come across, especially small suppliers who have questions or they have some exceptions to our standard insurance requirements, feel free to contact us and we can kind of talk through those. And then this is just some links to those sites that I talked about earlier. So feel free to peruse those when you have time and let us know if there's anything that we can help with.
All right. Well, appreciate the presentations and just learning more about why sometimes this is a little bit complicated. I use this time now for examples of the contracts I've had to sign, or that I shouldn't say have to sign, but the ones I've been sent more frequently, that this as an event coordinator over the past couple of years, what I've encountered a lot, and I've always wondered myself, and I've always been asked by others, what do we do when we get this kind of contract? Like, who signs it, who shouldn't sign it? So I'm just going to run through what I found, and if you guys have any questions, like I said, put them in the chat. We'll get to them at the end, and then we'll go from there. All right. So we were talking about outside venues. And so this was a great example from Marcus Jones. He went out to plan an event at the Phoenix Convention Center. And so, you know, we get these emails from back from the convention center, and it's just like, hey, great. Please sign and date the last page of the use agreement. And you're just, as an event coordinator, trying to just sign it and get it confirmed and probably move on, but you actually can't sign it. So what Marcus did was that he sent it to a contract specialist and was like, hey, can somebody please sign this, review it for me? And that Ernesto responded, and he was like, yep, we can sign it for you. And then he went ahead and did everything that Brennan and Benjamin were talking about, which was that they went through and they cut out the things that technically we're not supposed to sign for. So the indemnity clause, and then they replaced it with some, I didn't add the exhibit B, but it was pretty much like ASU's terms and conditions themselves. So this was a great example of, you're not supposed to sign outside facility agreements. You're supposed to send them for contract reviews. For this example directly of, this would have been, if we had to do anything, I think this was actually right in COVID as well. So, you know, this was just a great example. Brennan, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, so generally in those circumstances, we'll remove any conflicting language, and then as Marissa mentioned, we'll attach what's called ASU supplemental terms and conditions, which is essentially just a list of all of our state required provisions. It's not necessarily just stuff we want to add in there for for the sake of it. Generally, there's some guidelines that are requiring us to put those terms and conditions in there. So that's probably what Exhibit B is. in the future, funneling that through Marcus will help ensure that from a timing perspective that the agreement is reviewed in a timely manner.
All right, next one, internal spaces. I'm sure everybody here has done an event or looking to do an event at Old Main or at the Memorial Union, a student pavilion, something. And so I've always passed these along, but as Brennan and Benjamin, when we were reviewing this earlier, they were like, ASU isn't going to sue ASU. And so, because this is considered an internal venue, this is something I personally can sign. Brennan, would you like to add anything to that?
No, you said it right. We're not going to take ourselves to court. In signing internal documents is really just to ensure that, yes, Department A agrees to transfer funds to Department B for these services. So it's really nothing more than that. And we would treat it similar to a confirmation of an order or something along those lines.
Right. And same thing, like I mentioned, would apply to the student union. This is just an example from West Campus. So even though it has there's a few things in here, but it's more like what you're not supposed to do as a event coordinator. So glitter, confetti, and like candles are prohibited. Just some guidelines that we have to follow. So again, all you have to do is confirm the space, and then you're good to go. That doesn't need a dean. That can be you. So no contracts for DFA convocation. Brennan or Nicole, Desert Financial. Oh, sorry, Lynn, you're asking me personally, my bad. I'll get back to that on a different note because that only applies to a handful of us. All right, so Aramark catering order, again, ASU isn't going to sue ASU, and this is considered ASU catering service. So again, Aramark just reaches out to you to confirm your catering order. This is something that I'm allowed to sign, correct, Brennan?
Yes, to the extent that they're not adding some additional terms and conditions. So one of the things that we noticed through the Aramark catering order and a few others between Bright Rentals and Event Rents, I'm glad that you're putting these examples in here because it does. There are some areas that we need to address from a procurement perspective, but doesn't necessarily impact you all.
All right, and then these are the ones that I believe everybody has dealt with. So there is an Event Rents and there's a Bright Rentals contract. And so this is a recent one actually that I received. And so Event Rent sends me a quote and then they send me a terms document, which Brennan, they're not supposed to be doing.
I did not know that they were sending the terms in addition to it, which they should know otherwise. So that's one of the items that we're going to address with Event Rents as well as Bright Rentals. Ultimately, if we're going to confirm anything and you need to respond via email or sign something, you can do it on the quote or send an email just to confirm, yes, I confirm the details of the quote, and just completely ignore the term reference itself.
So a great example of what you're supposed to, of what it's supposed to sort of look like is what Bright Event Rental says, which is, please let me know when this is confirmed. As per ASU policy, you do not need to sign the rental agreement. Just let me know via email that this is confirmed and we are ready to go. If you are running into problems where they're asking you to sign, or you just have maybe a new event director or a new contact from Event Rents or Bright Event Rentals, and they're like asking you to sign, maybe double check that they need to go check the ASU policy. And then I can speak from experience because I work there. They're going to ask around and they'll figure it out. So, but either way, Brennan and Benjamin said they were going to reach out to Bright Event Rentals and Event Rents because they're not supposed to be sending us terms attached to these emails, just the quote and then our order confirmations.
Right, and if any of you see instances like that, feel free to let us know. If you know that they're a vendor that we've put out a formal solicitation for. And they're still attaching terms like this. Let us know so that we can address appropriately. There's another instance, I think with Atlasta Catering, where they have ASU sign terms of the order, but it's really just confirming that the catering order itself. I think there's another tab that they ask you to confirm, but it's just mostly related to the order, and that one's okay to sign as well.
All right, and then just want to touch base that Bright Event Rentals and Event Rents, they have to go through an RFP process, and so that's just a very extent process that they have to submit their bids for. But for smaller vendors like the DJs, the photo booths, Brendan, I believe you mentioned photographers earlier, where they just send you a quote. It's a small dollar amount. This was one I just did last fall for a DJ for Hispanic Convocation. He didn't ask me to sign this agreement. He just said, hey, can you just confirm that this is all good? Yes, confirmed it's all good. And then we process payment at the end. Brendan, is there anything else you would like to add?
No, that's right. I mean, the amount of $500, that's a relatively low amount to send through a purchase order. So if we're just confirming, or whatever else the service or goods that we're getting, then I think we're good there.
And then just want to add a reminder, Anthony Travel for your hotel needs. So if you're looking to book a hotel either for rooms or venue space, please use Anthony Travel. We had the presentation back in the fall, but just a refresher, or for any newcomers, reach out to Kira, and she will help. She can sign on behalf of ASU. She can, go through the terms and just negotiate on behalf of you, so you don't have to sign anything. And Anthony Travel is just there to help with that whole process. So, and with that, I'm going to leave it open for some questions. I'm getting a lot of personal questions, which I'm going to reach out to everybody afterwards.
This is Lynn Blake. I just wanted to, I did ask Marissa this question. I just wanted to confirm. When our own university uses our own spaces, for instance, convocations at Desert Financial Arena, do I need to do that full contract, or can I come up with, have a one-sheet agreement and attach the cost estimate to it and execute that with the coordinator?
So if it's ASU property by an ASU user, then we don't need a facilities use agreement, an FUA. This is just all, internal. And so, every venue is a little bit different. And I know that Memorial Union, they actually have an online reservation process that you've probably all seen, where they have their rules and regulations on their website. I don't know specifically what Sun Devil Stadium is like, but that can be all handled internally. And if it's just one department just asking the other department to confirm that they're going to send funds over to cover the costs, that's something that doesn't need a formal agreement, and so it can just be handled internally.
Thank you. I also represent Gamage Auditorium. Same goes for the convocations and fall welcome events and things of that nature. Just wanted to confirm and hear it out loud, Nicole.
Sure.
So
right.
Yes to that as well. Covers the whole.
Yeah, any ASU property that's being used by ASU does not need a facilities use agreement. It can be handled internally.
You just saved me from writing 30. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right, there is a question that says, is Marcus Benavides the first stop for speaker agreements as well? Aida, can you elaborate a little bit more on what you're talking about there?
Yeah, I'm just wondering mostly when we're working with like a speakers bureau or, an agent representing a speaker, would we send the ASU speaker agreement for review through Marcus first? Because I've been over the years like working with different people. So I just want to make sure I'm, going through the proper channels.
I don't think we can get through a meeting with a large group of people without talking about speaker agreements. So it's every time we have a procurement meeting, speaker agreements come up because there's such a large volume of them. But so the first step would be to try and get them to use our speaker agreement. It's very rare that we actually negotiate speaker agreements with the booking agent, but to the extent that we do, generally what we would do is fill out our speaker agreement that has our standard terms and conditions and attach any additional content that the speakers bureau or whomever else wants to include with that. We would work in conjunction with your team. The first step would probably be to funnel that through Marcus if we need to go through that effort. We have a couple of contract specialists that Marcus is able to delegate the reviews to. So it's not just going to be Marcus that's reviewing all contracts that come in for the university. He's basically the first stop so that he can help distribute the workload to the individuals.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
All right, and I have an email or a message. It says, can you confirm that we cannot sign any hotel contracts or banquet space regardless of the amount, as Anthony Travel can only sign on behalf of ASU?
Well, I'm sorry, what was that latter part?
It says, can you confirm that we cannot sign any hotel contracts or banquet space regardless of the amount, as Anthony Travel can only sign on behalf of ASU?
Well, I mean, it depends on what the agreement says. I mean, if it's just a confirmation of a booking of rooms, I don't think there's a particular issue with that. But I can guarantee you that the majority of hotel agreements, if it's something direct, will have additional terms and conditions that go along with it. I don't know that I've ever seen a hotel agreement that doesn't have additional terms and conditions that go along with it. And to the extent that it does, then we would have to funnel it through our contracts review team if we go outside of Anthony Travel.
Oh, okay. Follow up to the speaker agreement. Just to clarify, all speaker agreements need to be sent through Marcus, or our dean can sign the agreement if it is completed with no issues.
Yeah, please don't send all speaker agreements to Marcus. So only ones that where we have to deviate from our standard speaker agreement. Thank you for asking that.
All right, okay, hold on. Okay, I'm just gonna read this question out loud. This may be a question for Jackie. I have been referring to the procurement quick reference guide and don't see the speaker artist performance agreement mentioned. I would think a PO would be best if the supplier can't accept a P card, but last week I put in a requisition for a PO, and after unit review, I was told to obtain an speaker agreement performance form. Is that a departmental preference or an ABOR ASU requirement? What is the best practice regarding speaker agreement performers agreements? That was a lot of questions.
So, Jackie, I think this is more of a procurement question.
I would say so.
Generally, we wouldn't necessarily have an issue with just issuing a purchase order if that's okay with the speaker or the agency that's booking on their behalf. But oftentimes they want to confirm the details of that engagement, which is why we steer people towards the speaker agreement itself. So if you're having trouble or don't know where to access that document, then we can provide a link for Marissa to share with everybody.
Yes, I can make sure that it's in the follow-up. I believe, Nathaniel, you have your hand raised.
Oops, yes, I do. I have a question about certificates of insurance. I handle all the film, photo, and video shoots on any of ASU's properties in Arizona or California. And on rare occasion, but it has happened, I've had a circumstance where we may have a faculty member that has someone come to film an interview with them. And they're coming from an organization that literally has no money. And I have been, I don't want to use the word pressured, encouraged to allow, and it has happened once or twice since 2009, since I've been here, where they have not actually provided a COI. Who actually gets to approve whether or not a COI waiver? Because actually that's probably something we shouldn't be doing on our own.
Well, yeah, you shouldn't waive the insurance requirements on your own. That's something that should come to risk management.
So who is it that I should reach out to in those cases?
You can go to insurance services. There's plenty of us that check the box to address the questions, but insurance services at asu.edu is
Okay, yes, I'm familiar with them. I use them
Yeah.
for the drone permits and things like that as well.
Right.
So
Mhm.
I just didn't know who it was that I needed to reach out to. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure.
And also, just for the group's general awareness, there's actually if it's a commercial filming or photography, that there's a process through Enterprise Brand, and I'll put the link in the chat box here as it relates to commercial filming and photography. So for example, if it's if it's a company that wants to film a commercial on ASU's campus, that's something that would need to be reviewed, and a filming agreement would need to be entered into if Enterprise Brand approves something of that nature.
Right, I am the person that
mhm.
does those.
Oh,
for
okay,
Arizona.
terrific. Yes.
And
So you can tell us all about the process.
They were
Yes.
the ones that were pressuring me, actually. So, but in any event, now I know who I go to make sure that that is covered. So thank you very much.
No problem.
Okay, next question. If you're bringing an outside group that's bringing animals such as therapy dogs, birds, etc., on campus as an ASU hosted event, does the outside organization need to supply insurance per ASU's requirements?
Yes.
Straight to the point. I love it.
Whether we're paying them or not, it's a good idea, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions we can help clarify, answer?
I was just gonna mention, Marissa, if they go out to the CFO website, that the procurement, there's a procurement guide. And then there's a tab that's called Quick Guides that has a bunch of links to different items related to speakers, artists, and performers for them to reference. So there's instructions there. There's a template to use to start filling out if we need to use a speaker, artist, performer agreement.
All right, now be sure to add that to the follow-up email. There's gonna be a lot of documents or a lot of links in this follow-up email, guys. All right, well, I don't see any other questions coming through. So Brennan, Benjamin, Jackie, Nicole, thank you so much for your time. And everybody, please keep an eye out for the registration links for those upcoming events. And I will be sending a recording and the slides later this week. So with that, have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.